talking to us on liberalism and socialism, the system path to reconciliation.
About 6 months ago, I was surprised at a set of numbers that came out. I'll just read you the numbers. According to the Gallup survey from last year, 53% of Democrats and 61% of liberals have a positive image of socialism. The Gallup findings are backed up by a December Rasmussen survey, December 2010 Rasmussen survey, which found that 42% of the Democrats, the people who Howard Dean referred to as the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party, argued that the government should manage the economy in its entirety. Now, what's meant by socialism in these surveys is not the old ideal of public ownership. The notion that as much of the economy as is feasible should be run through the government. Now, why is this important? Because, in part, there's been a debate, is President Obama a socialist? Most of what's been written on this has been right-wing claptrap. The exception is a book by a guy named Stanley Kurtz. I don't know if people have heard of it, called Radical in Chief. It's very thorough, very careful, and unpolemical. And it begins at a 1983 Socialist Scholars Conference at Cooper Union. And began reading it, and since I was there, I think I gave 2 speeches there. Since I was at it, I was stunned at how much he'd gotten right. It's not just a ranting book. But as I finished Kurtz's book, I was unhappy with it because it missed the underlying change. Whether what Obama is or isn't is less important than what liberalism is and isn't. And what I try to make sense of was the way liberalism and socialism as I've defined it previously, were reconciled over the course of the 1960s and 1970s. And since I was present at some of the events in which this reconciliation took place, I try to make sense of this for myself. The Democratic Party in the 1960s and 70s was reshaped. The party of saloon keepers and Southern segregationists was no more. The party was reshaped by two rising forces. I should say 3 rising forces. The rise of the New Left, the rise of African American politics, and the rise of public sector unionism. Obama came of age at a time when the left seemed to be surging in America and around the world. America had been defeated in Vietnam, the Soviets had won in Afghanistan. By the time Obama attended this conference in '83, the reconciliation was well underway. What's the basis of it? Let me just go back in time. The enormous explosion in the number of college students in the 1960s was associated with the rise of the new class. Not exactly in Telos' sense of the word, but a sense of professional class that didn't attach itself to the traditional middle class mores. The public sector union movement rose in the 60s. And people have forgotten this now with the debates over exploding public sector pensions and near budget defaults in a variety of states like Illinois. But the public sector union movement was part of the civil rights movement. It drew energy from the civil rights movement. It drew support from the civil rights movement. These 2 developments, the rise of the new class and the rise of the public sector union, had profound long-term impact on American politics. In the 60s, they were overshadowed by bigger events, by more dramatic events. The number of Americans with college degrees in their 20s tripled between 1950 and 1970. Tripled. An extraordinary transformation. Extraordinary transformation. And in the course of that, professors trotted out the old argument from William James that America needed an aristocracy and that these students should provide that aristocracy. Taken more broadly, new leftists can be divided into 2 categories. bohemians, and bureaucrats. I don't mean they were bureaucrats as students, I mean future bureaucrats. And of those, there were many. Now, the first group is obviously more colorful, more interesting. You would be around when you're an undergraduate. Every year, the networks still do something on Woodstock. The bureaucrats were dull, uninteresting people. They're the ones who were important in the long run. They're the ones who became central to the rise of the new class and central to what became the Democratic Party and its shift toward increasing statism. Now, there's a guy named David Bazelon. Anyone, his name familiar to anyone anymore? David Bazelon was a professor at the University of Buffalo, former lawyer. He'd been a member of the New York intellectual world for 20 years. He writes a book in the mid-'60s called The Rise of the New Class. And it's not well written. And Christopher Lasch lashes it in the New York Review of Books. And Lasch gets literally everything wrong. And he admits to me at one point, he got everything wrong. The book was completely right. Bazelon saw what was coming. And what Lasch saw, what Lasch got right, is the search for prosthetic proletarians, which could be youth, it could be women, it could be African Americans, etc., etc. That this new class and the search for new proletariats would come together. What Bazelon sees is that when this new group of rising bureaucrats becomes conscious of itself, it will become a force in American politics. And it becomes conscious of itself during the clashes of the 1960s over race and over Vietnam, subjects on which they were both right. There was a darker element to this rise of the new left and its connection to the new class. And that was the article of faith for many people. I knew, and I know Russell knew, and Paul knew, that liberalism was actually disguised fascism. Some of you know Jonah Goldberg's book from a couple of years ago, Liberalism is Really Fascism. I had to review it for the Wall Street Journal. I didn't say this in review because it would be too problematic, but Jonah Goldberg had taken the old new 60s New Left argument and simply recast it as a right-wing argument. But it was the same set of examples, the same argument. And a guy at Wisconsin named Evan Stark, he got it. He said, of course liberals weren't actually fascist, but they defined a project which was so dramatic in its very unpredictability, and so discarded with the quote, I'm quoting him now, the boring machinations of communists and social democrats, that it was galvanizing. And so what came out of this is what the French, I'm going to mispronounce this, even when I taught at the Sorbonne, I mispronounced everything, as they never stopped reminding me. Surenchère, outbidding, the sense of outbidding each other on how evil America was. Out of that argument came what you might describe as the minoritarian strain of the 60s, as opposed to the New Deal majoritarian strain. There are these are two strains of politics. The majoritarian strain still invoked at times, when it was useful, the New Deal. The minoritarian strain came into full light at an extraordinary moment at the 1972 Democratic Convention. What's happening there?